There, Tony and I want to welcome you to our study in the Psalms. We're in Psalm 50 today. We've been reading about the early church, and they had a serious emphasis on sin and judgment. I can't overemphasize that. In contrast with the early churches, our modern day church, which presents God as kind of our pal or our good psychologist who really kind of gets through our sin and gets us on to the good life. I'm exaggerating a little bit about today. I'm not exaggerating about the past. They were very serious. Psalm 50 is a psalm where the people of God are invited to God's courtroom to learn about his decision about their lives. Tony, why don't you start us off?
The temple priest in Psalm 50 put the people on notice that God was in his courtroom judging the behavior of his people. Verses 3 and 4 say, "Our God is coming, but not in silence. A raging fire is in front of him, a furious storm around him. He calls heaven and earth as witnesses to see him judge his people." A study of the words "cry out" will give us an idea of how people testify to God about wrongdoing and injustice. God said this to Cain about Abel. "Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground," in Genesis 4:10. There is an entire theme concerning the shedding of innocent blood in the Old Testament. Imagine the thousands of people who die in war, ethnic conflicts, and street violence. The blood of the innocent cry out to God for justice. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery their cry for help rose up to God. Exodus 2:23. According to the website Modern Day Slavery Statistics, there are 20 to 30 million people who are in slavery at this moment. Modern slaves account for billions of dollars of revenue for the powerful, while they receive no benefit for their service. Like the Israelites, their cry is heard in God's courtroom. James adds the unjust treatment of laborers to the witnesses in God's courtroom. He writes, "Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts." These three examples are a small sample of the ways that other people provide testimony in God's courtroom. These people depend on the fact that the judge of all the earth will do what is just.
You got it. Let me just mention to you, if you go to www.real-voices.com, I have a link in there about that modern day slavery. It's a really interesting and quite disturbing website, and you might go there and look. So not only does God call all of us there, and he calls witnesses, he also calls what he calls the faithful. And so we're told in verses 5 and 6, "Gather my faithful people to me, those who made a covenant with me by offering a sacrifice." The heavens proclaim that God is righteous, that he himself is judge. When God calls people faithful, he is talking to us about a living in a personal relationship with him. And so we do follow his direction, we follow his guidance. He serves us by being our God, and he helps us and he blesses us. But at the root of that is a personal relationship. And so when the priest in the temple talked about a sacrifice, you would think, well, sacrifice would be an animal or grain or maybe money. But in this case, God says something else. So let's look at this, verses 14 and 15. "Let the giving of thanks be your sacrifice to God, and give the Almighty all that you promised. Call to me when trouble comes, I'll save you, and you'll praise me." If you think about it, there's only one thing that God doesn't have. He has created the entire universe. And in this psalm, he talks about, I don't need your food. I don't need your cattle. I don't need your sheep. I don't need your grain. He talks about that. There's one thing he does desire, and that's our heart. Jesus Christ came to this world. He lived, he died, he was buried, he rose again, so that people like you and me could give to him our heart. And the one thing he wants is our heart. How do we express our hearts given over to him? One is by saying thank you. We live in gratitude, and we are conscious of how he cares for us. But the other is to dialogue with him in prayer about what we need. We give to him our thanks, and we give to him our needs, and he is pleased. That is the sacrifice that he wants from us.
After God calls people who live in gratitude and prayer, he calls the wicked to give an account of their activities. Apparently, they know and can repeat God's commands, yet they choose to ignore God's direction and choose to live self-centered and self-sufficient lives. Psalms 50, 16 through 17 says, "But God says to the wicked, why should you recite my commandments? Why should you talk about my covenant? You refuse to let me correct you. You reject my commandments." If the wicked want proof of their bad behavior, God lists them in this Psalms. Verse 18 says, "They are friendly with and don't correct those who cheat others out of their possessions, and they are quite at home with those who are sexually immoral." Verse 19 tells us, "Lying words and evil talk come as naturally to them as breathing." Verse 20 tells us, "Even though they are quick to lie, they are also prone to finding fault with others." And the worst indictment is that they think God is like them. Verse 21 says, "You have done all this, and I have said nothing. So you thought that I am like you."
Right. I will just tell you that that phrase right there is one that just grabs my heart. And I pray that God doesn't think that I think that he's like me when I sin. So one of the things we could do as we conclude our thought about this psalm is to provide ourselves a time of self-examination. Here's a couple questions. How's my relationship with God? Is it vibrant? Do I frequently give him thanks? Do I bring to him the needs of my life? Do I connect with him in prayer? Here's another question. If people around me, my wife, my kids, people I work with, if people around me were summoned to witness, would they say, I live a Jesus kind of life? Or would they say something else? Let's think about that. And then as we look at the offenses that Tony just read from this last part of the psalm, are there any of those that I can say, well, eek, I do some of that? And so I think we ought to think about that. And then maybe the last one, do we think that somehow God and we have a deal? He overlooks my sin. It's okay. It's all right. He approves somehow of my behavior. Those are questions we really ought to do well to ask ourselves and to bring before God and to say, Lord, I repent. I turn to you. I give this to you. Okay? Thanks for being a part today. And if you have a prayer request, send me an email, bsprad49@gmail, or private message me on Facebook. Tony and I'll pray for you, and we'll ask our prayer team at Maywood Baptist to do the same. Again, thanks for being here. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.